The Crown of Shadows. Chapter 1. The Omen. The winter of that year fell heavy upon England. Snow lay deep upon the hills of Winchester, where the great cathedral's spire pierced the grey sky, a spear of stone aimed at the heavens. Fires guttered in the streets, and the people whispered of strange signs in the night, the moon burning red, the Thames running dark, wolves howling at the very walls of London. In her chamber high in the castle, Empress Matilda stood by a window, gazing into the storm. She was no maiden of faint heart nor cloistered noblewoman. She was the daughter of kings, the widow of an emperor, the rightful heir to the throne of England. Her hair, black as raven's wing, was braided beneath a circlet of silver, and her eyes, keen, unyielding, filled with the iron of her will, scanned the heavens. For 3 nights the visions had come to her. She had seen a crown in flames, a throne shattered by shadow, and a knight clad in sable armor riding from a rift of fire. Always the dream ended the same. A voice like thunder proclaiming, "The fate of England is bound to the Black Prince." Matilda pressed her hand to the cold glass. "A prince not yet born," she whispered, for Edward of Woodstock, the one history would call the Black Prince, lived centuries beyond her age. And yet the dream carried truth. She felt it in her bones, as certain as steel. Behind her, a soft rustle of robes. "Your Grace," came the voice of Brother Athelred, her confessor and scribe. "You do not sleep." "Sleep?" She turned sharply, her gown of deep crimson sweeping the rushes. "While shadows coil about this realm? No, Athelred. The air reeks of sorcery. I will not rest while unseen hands weave against me." The monk bowed his tonsured head, but his eyes flickered with unease. He too had heard the rumors that sorcerers, cast out from Normandy, had crept across the Channel, binding themselves to rebellious lords who sought to cast Matilda aside. They spoke of a crown of shadows, a cursed diadem forged in forgotten fires, capable of twisting the course of kingship itself. And then, the chamber shook, a rumble as though the very earth groaned beneath the castle. Matilda staggered, grasping the window's edge. The torches along the wall flared blue, sputtered, and went out. A silence deeper than death fell. Then, from the center of the chamber, a tear opened in the air itself. Black fire crackled, and through it strode a figure, a knight in darkened mail, his surcoat bearing the lilies of France quartered with the leopards of England. His helm was under his arm, and his face, noble, pale, marked with the sternness of many battles, turned upon her with eyes that gleamed like storm clouds. Matilda's breath caught. She knew that face, though it should not be. "Edward," she whispered, "the Black Prince." The knight frowned, his voice deep as the tolling of a bell. "What sorcery is this? One moment I rode the fields of Aquitaine, the next I am torn through fire and shadow into a place that smells of frost and ancient stone." His hand fell to his sword hilt. "Speak, lady, what realm is this?" Matilda, though her heart thundered, did not falter. She stepped forward, her bearing regal. "This is England, Sir Knight. My England, and you stand before Matilda, rightful empress and heir of this realm." Edward bowed slightly, as courtesy demanded, but suspicion remained in his gaze. "An empress and England's heir? Yet the England I know lies 2 centuries hence, and the throne is held by my father, King Edward." "Time is broken," Matilda said, her voice low, fierce. "Shadows meddle with the crown. You were sent by fate, drawn by prophecy. The realm bleeds, and without you it will fall to darkness." Even as she spoke, the air beyond the torn rift writhed. From the black flame issued a hiss, then a shape, twisted, armored in scales, its maw dripping venom. A shadow beast, born of sorcery. Edward's blade flashed free, steel singing. "Then let me earn my welcome." The beast lunged. Edward met it with a roar, his sword cleaving scales. Black ichor splattered the rushes, and the chamber filled with the stench of brimstone. Matilda seized a candlestick of wrought iron, striking when the beast turned. Together, woman and prince fought, her blows fierce and unflinching, his strikes masterful as only England's greatest knight could deliver. At last the creature shrieked, writhing, and fell into smoke. The rift snapped shut with a thunderclap, leaving silence once more. Edward stood, chest heaving, blade dripping shadow blood. Slowly, he lowered his sword. His eyes met Matilda's, iron will and warrior's fire reflected in each other. "So be it," he said. "If fate has torn me from my age, then I will fight beside you, Empress. Let the shadows learn the steel of the Black Prince." And Matilda, though she had stood alone against kings and traitors, felt a strange surge in her heart, hope, fierce and burning. The prophecy had spoken true. The war for England's soul had begun. Then another rose. A man in robes of midnight blue, his face hidden by a hood, hands adorned with rings that shimmered with faint light. He was no baron of England. None had seen him enter. Yet there he stood among them as though he had always belonged. "My Lady Empress," the hooded figure intoned, his voice like a whisper of dead leaves, "you speak of shadows, yet shadows are but truth unhidden. The realm does not hunger for foreign knights nor broken prophecies. It craves strength, and strength lies not in crowns of silver or gold, but in the crown of shadows. Deny it, and your cause shall wither. Claim it, and all England shall kneel." The hall fell to a hush colder than winter itself. Edward's blade half left its scabbard with a hiss. "Name yourself, sorcerer, before I carve the darkness from your tongue." But the hooded man only smiled beneath his cowl. "I am but a servant of what comes. Remember me, Empress, when your lords forsake you and only the shadows offer solace." And as swiftly as smoke, he was gone, leaving naught but the echo of his words. For a long while none spoke. Then Geoffrey's voice, soft but carrying, broke the silence. "You see, my lady? Even the shadows themselves demand tribute. Can you resist such a tide?" Matilda's hands gripped the arms of her chair. Her eyes blazed with fury and unyielding steel. "I am Matilda, daughter of Henry, crowned by Rome, heir to this throne by right of blood and will. I will not bow to shadows. I will not cede England to sorcery or treachery. If any lord here craves such dark gifts, let him stand, and I shall name him traitor to crown and realm alike." No man rose, though many shifted uneasily. Edward stepped forward, his voice ringing like a trumpet of war. "Hear her words, and hear mine. In my own age I am Prince of England, and I swear by my honor, by my sword, by the blood of kings, that I stand beside this Empress. Against shadows or sorcery, against traitors or beasts, let all who would sunder this realm know. They must first break the steel of Edward, the Black Prince." The days that followed the banquet were thick with unease. The common folk whispered of poison that turned to fire, of demons unmasked in the hall of Winchester. Some swore the Empress dined with ghosts, others that God himself had sent a prince from the future to guard her. But among the nobles, whispers ran darker. Messengers rode by night, carrying secret letters to castles where loyalties already wavered. In shadowed chambers, oaths were sworn not to the Empress, but to the unseen lords of sorcery who promised power. Edward trained daily in the yard, his presence drawing soldiers and townsfolk alike. His blade sang, his skill unmatched, and though he gave no boast, his deeds spoke for him. Yet at times Matilda saw the shadow in his eyes, the burden of one torn from his own age, uncertain if he fought for a crown he would never wear, or for a destiny not his own. One evening, as the last light of day bled across the sky, a messenger was brought to Matilda's chamber. The man was pale, half mad with terror, his cloak ragged, his voice hoarse. "My lady," he gasped, "forgive me. I fled as far as I could. The village of Stockbridge, it is no more. Shadows walked from the forest, creatures that burned with black fire. They took the people, all of them, men, women, children. Their voices still cry in the air." His words broke, and he wept. Edward's hand clenched into a fist. "Then it begins. They no longer creep in halls or hide in guises. They come openly, to sow terror and death. Matilda turned to Robert of Gloucester, who had stood silent as stone. Summon the council. We march at dawn. If shadows think to root themselves in my realm, we shall tear them up by the root and burn them. The council gathered that night. Torches cast long shadows upon the chamber walls as Matilda's lords assembled, some loyal, some wavering, all uneasy. Maps were spread across the table, inkpots trembling with the force of the Empress's will as she spoke. They strike at villages to weaken us, she said, to fill our people with dread. If we do not answer swiftly, fear will rot the realm faster than any blade. At dawn, I ride to Stockbridge with those loyal. Let the wolves who slink in shadows see that the Empress does not cower behind walls. A murmur rose. Dissent. Geoffrey de Mandeville's voice carried above the rest. Reckless folly. To march against creatures of smoke and flame with but mortal steel? Better we fortify, let the storm pass, and make our bargains when the time is ripe. The crown of shadows, Matilda whispered. They dare to mark their dominion upon my land. A low moan drifted across the empty street. From the ruined inn stumbled a figure, a woman, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She moved as though in a dream, her voice cracked and strange. They wait for you, lady, they wait, beneath the earth. Before any could reach her, her body convulsed. Shadows poured from her mouth, twisting into tendrils that seized her limbs. With a cry, she collapsed, her flesh dissolving into smoke. Where she fell, a fissure opened in the earth, black fire blazing. From it rose figures cloaked in night, sorcerers, their faces hidden, their hands weaving fire and darkness. Around them prowled beasts of shadow, eyes burning like coals. The soldiers faltered, terror in their eyes. But Matilda raised her voice, ringing across the ruin like a bell of war. Stand fast. This is England, and no shadow shall claim it while I draw breath. Edward's blade flashed free, and he spurred his horse forward, crying, for the Empress. For England. The battle was joined. Steel rang against shadow flesh, and cries split the air. The beasts lunged, their claws raking, but Edward met them head-on, his sword cleaving, his shield shattering blows. He fought with the fury of a storm, every strike a hymn of defiance. Matilda dismounted, seizing a fallen spear, her mantle streaming as she thrust at the sorcerers themselves. One raised a hand, black fire spilling forth, but she did not flinch. The spear drove through his chest, and he dissolved into ash. Robert rallied the men, his voice carrying above the din. Arrows flew, piercing the beasts, though each wound bled smoke instead of blood. Yet for every shadow slain, more pressed forth. The fissure widened, black flame roaring. From its depths came a voice, vast, cold, echoing with malice. Matilda, Edward, you defy the crown of shadows. But all crowns must bow. Yours will burn, and your names be dust. The ground shook. From the fissure rose a shape vast and terrible, a giant rod of smoke and fire, crowned with thorns of shadow. Its eyes blazed like suns of ruin. The soldiers quailed, some dropping their weapons. But Matilda stepped forward, her voice unshaken. You speak of crowns, monster. Then face those who were born to wear them. Edward stood at her side, sword blazing with reflected flame. Steel and will, he said. Let us show them both. Together they charged. The clash was titanic. Edward's blade bit deep into the giant's form, light flaring where steel struck shadow. Matilda hurled her spear, piercing the crown upon its head, and the creature howled, writhing. Black fire erupted, searing the earth. At last, with a cry that shook the heavens, Edward drove his sword through the beast's heart of flame. It shrieked, staggering, then fell into the fissure as the earth sealed shut with a thunderclap. Silence fell. Smoke drifted across the ruin. The soldiers, stunned, looked upon their empress and her champion, and in their eyes burned awe and faith. Matilda raised her hand. You have seen the shadows. You have seen their crown. And you have seen that they can bleed, they can break, they can fall. So long as we stand together, no darkness shall master England. A cheer rose, ragged at first, then thundering. Edward sheathed his sword, his eyes meeting Matilda's. In that look lay a bond, forged in battle, tempered by fire. The court of wolves might yet betray them. The shadows might rise again. But in that moment, hope flared brighter than any darkness. Chapter 3: The Siege of Light. The triumph at Stockbridge carried with it both glory and dread. Matilda and Edward returned to Winchester beneath a sky bruised with storm, the banners of their host whipping in the cold wind. Word of their victory against the shadow beast had run faster than their horses. By the time the city gates loomed, throngs of common folk filled the roadsides, kneeling, cheering, weeping as they beheld the Empress who had not hidden in her keep but struck the shadows down with spear in hand. Children held up garlands of winter flowers, throwing them before her horse. Old men lifted trembling voices in praise, though fear still rimmed their eyes. For the people had seen fire fall from the sky, had heard whispers of monsters wearing men's skins. Hope and terror mingled like water and wine. Matilda rode with her chin high, her mantle spattered with ash, her eyes hard as tempered steel. She knew that hope was a fire she must feed, even as shadows pressed close. Edward rode beside her, dark and shining, his sword still notched from the great beast's heart. His presence was a mystery the people could not name, yet they hailed him as if some half-forgotten prophecy had taken flesh. Within the hall of Winchester, however, the air was colder. The lords who bent their knees did so stiffly, and their eyes measured Edward with envy or suspicion. Geoffrey de Mandeville knelt longest of all, his lips pressed to the Empress's hand, but when he rose, his gaze slid sideways, like a wolf calculating the weakest of the herd. That night, as feasts were laid and bells rung, Geoffrey slipped from the hall to a chamber lit only by a single candle. There he found others waiting. Barons whose loyalty had always hung loose as a cloak in summer heat, their ambition outweighing their honor. "The Empress grows dangerous," Geoffrey whispered. "She commands not only men, but storms and shadows themselves. Do you not see? That black prince she keeps beside her is no man, but some sorcerer's construct. Would you place England in the hands of witch queen and phantom knight?" A murmur of assent rippled. Then, from the corner of the room, a voice answered, silken, venomous. "She need not reign. The crown of shadows rewards those who serve it. Gold, dominion, immortality, all these are gifts for the wise." From the gloom stepped a figure cloaked in sable, its face hidden, but its hands pale and long, marked with runes that smoldered faintly. The barons recoiled, but none fled. "Winchester will fall," the envoy said. "Open its gates, and the darkness shall pass you by. Resist, and you shall be ash with the rest." Geoffrey's eyes gleamed. He bowed. "Then Winchester's gates shall be yours." 3 days later, Edward stood upon the city walls, staring across the winter fields. What he beheld turned even his seasoned blood cold. An army was gathering, not of men alone, but of things wrought in nightmare. Companies of warriors marched, their eyes glazed, their wills enthralled. Black hounds prowled among them, larger than horses, their mouths dripping fire. Behind them rolled engines of siege, not of oak and iron but of bone and shadow, glowing with an inner heat that scorched the earth where their wheels turned. And above all, upon a distant rise, a crown of flame hovered, suspended in air. Beneath it stood the shadow sorcerers, their number now in dozens, perhaps more. Their chants rose like a black wind, echoing across the plain. Edward descended from the wall, his jaw set. "They come tonight." In the great hall, Matilda gathered her captains, her voice strong though the torches sputtered in the draught. "We face not rebels nor foreign foes, but sorcery. Yet steel bites shadow, and will defies flame. Let every man, every woman who can bear arms take to the walls. This is not merely Winchester's fight, but England's." Cheers rose, fierce and desperate. For if doom was upon them, it was better met with sword in hand. That night, the siege began. It started with fire. Arrows tipped with black flame hissed from the dark, falling like rain upon the city. Roofs blazed, streets lit as day. Bells clanged, cries split the night, and men scrambled to douse the infernos. Then came the beasts. Shadows writhed at the base of the walls, coiling upward like living ropes. Black hounds leapt, their claws scraping stone, their howls like thunder. Edward led the defense, sword gleaming, striking down beast after beast as they scaled the battlements. Around him soldiers rallied, their fear tempered by his unyielding presence. Matilda herself stood at the western gate, clad in full mail, her helm crowned with a circlet of silver. When her guard faltered, she seized a banner and lifted it high, crying, "Winchester stands! England stands!" Her voice carried above the chaos, and hearts hardened in resolve. But amid the fury, betrayal struck. Geoffrey de Mandeville, cloaked in night, slipped with his men to the southern gate. There, under cover of flame and smoke, they slew the watchmen and drew back the bars. With a groan like a dying beast, the gate yawned open. Shadows poured through, flooding the streets, their black fire devouring all in its path. Panic spread. The city, already besieged without, now burned from within. Edward heard the screams and wheeled his horse. He cut a path through snarling beasts and terrified men alike, his blade unerring, his shield battered. At his side rode Robert of Gloucester, rallying stragglers into a wedge of steel. They burst into the southern quarter to find it aflame. Shadows prowled the streets, slaughtering without mercy. Among them rode Geoffrey, his armor gleaming, his face twisted in triumph. "So, the cur shows his teeth," Edward growled. He spurred forward, but Geoffrey's men closed in, steel against steel. Geoffrey sneered, "Better Shadow's crown than yours, witch queen." He raised his blade. "Winchester is lost," but Edward met him before the stroke fell. Their swords rang like thunder. Geoffrey was skilled, cunning, but Edward fought with the fury of a lion torn from time itself. Blow after blow he struck, until at last Geoffrey faltered. With one final thrust, Edward's sword pierced the traitor's heart. Geoffrey fell, his lifeblood steaming in the cold night. "Then let Shadow crown you in death," Edward said. The battle raged until dawn. When the sun rose, it shone upon a city battered, burned, but unbroken. The gates were closed once more, the beasts driven back beyond the walls. Corpses lay heaped in the streets, both shadow and man. Matilda stood upon the steps of the cathedral, her armor rent, her hair loose, her face streaked with ash. The people gathered, hollow-eyed, yet when she raised her hand, silence fell. "Winchester has endured," she said, "not by sorcery, nor by fear, but by faith and steel. Let all England know. The Empress does not bow. The wolves among us have been cast down, the shadows driven back. We are bloodied, but we are not broken." Her words spread like fire through the crowd. Hope rose again, fierce as the morning sun. Beside her, Edward stood silent, his sword resting against the stone, his eyes dark with foreboding. For he knew this was but the beginning. The crown of shadows had tested them, and next, it would come in full strength. The murmur of voices rose again, louder this time, but beneath it ran a note of awe. Whatever doubts the lords held, they could not mistake the fire in Edward's words, nor the fierce certainty with which he spoke them. It was as though some echo of destiny had filled the hall. Robert of Gloucester struck the table with his fist. "So let it be written, so let it be done. The Empress has her champion, and England her sword. If sorcery would test us, then we will answer it with steel and faith." The hall erupted with shouts, some in assent, others muttered and grim. For though many feared the shadows, more still feared the strength of Matilda's will and the might of this prince at her side. Later, when the lords had dispersed and the hall lay empty but for the banners and flickering torches, Matilda withdrew with Edward to a private chamber. There, away from prying ears, the Empress allowed her mask of unshaken authority to soften, if only a little. You see it, do you not? She asked, pacing before the hearth where the fire smoldered low. The wolves that gather in my court, they bow and smile, yet their teeth are bared. Some already feast with shadows. Edward leaned his mailed arms upon the table, his eyes dark. I have seen such courts before, in my own age. Treachery wears a silken cloak. But never have I seen sorcery flaunted so boldly. That creature, that beast, it was no mortal foe. If your realm is beset by such things, then I will fight beside you. Yet I am torn from my age. I know not why, nor whether I shall ever return. Matilda's gaze softened, just slightly. Perhaps you were never meant to return. Perhaps destiny plucked you forth for this very purpose. Edward gave a short, grim smile. Then destiny had best not regret it. The days that followed were restless ones. Word of the apparition spread across England. Some said the Empress had bound a demon to her service. Others hailed the coming of a champion foretold in prophecy. Lords rode from their strongholds to Winchester, eager to see the Black Prince with their own eyes. At first, many doubted. But when Edward sparred in the yard, the doubts withered. His sword sang like lightning. His movements were swift and sure as though he had fought 100 wars. He unhorsed knights thrice his size, shattered shields with a single blow, and though he fought with courtesy, none mistook his strength. The soldiers cheered him, calling him Shadow Slayer, Lion of the Empress. To the common folk he became a figure of wonder, a story told by firelight. Yet among the nobles, suspicion deepened. Geoffrey de Mandeville was not the only wolf who prowled. One evening, a great banquet was held in the hall to honor the Empress and her newfound champion. The tables groaned beneath roasted boar, venison, bread and wine. Minstrels played softly, their lutes weaving song beneath the voices of the lords. Candles cast wavering light, painting every face in shifting hues. Matilda sat at the high table, Edward beside her, Robert of Gloucester across. All seemed merry, yet beneath the laughter Edward's warrior's instinct stirred unease. He saw too many glances exchanged, too many smiles that did not reach the eyes. The moment came when a servant, pale and trembling, brought forth a golden chalice brimming with wine, setting it before the Empress. Edward's hand shot out, seizing her wrist before she touched it. Wait, his eyes narrowed. The chalice shimmered strangely, its surface rippling as though touched by unseen hands. He rose and flung the wine upon the rushes. At once the liquid hissed, burning through straw as though it were acid. Smoke coiled upward, filling the hall with the stench of brimstone. Cries erupted. Men leapt to their feet. The servant shrieked and collapsed, his body twisting, flesh melting into shadow. Before their eyes he transformed, limbs elongating, face warping into a leering mask. A shadow creature, cloaked in human guise, had stood at the Empress's very table. Edward's blade was in his hand before the creature could move. With a cry he struck, cleaving it in twain. Black ichor spattered the boards, and the corpse melted into smoke. The hall was chaos. Lords shouted, some drawing swords, others backing away in terror. Matilda's voice cut through the tumult like steel. Silence. She stood, tall and terrible, her face alight with fury. You see it with your own eyes. The shadows have taken form, and they walk among us. Will you still prattle of omens, of curses, of doubts? Look well, my lords, for this is the enemy we face. Her words, and Edward's swift sword, bound the hall in awe. Even Geoffrey de Mandeville, though his lips curled, did not dare speak against her then. That night, in the quiet after, Matilda and Edward stood again before the fire. They are testing us, Edward said, his tone grim. Probing our strength, measuring our resolve. If a creature could come so near to you at table, then nowhere is safe. They think to break me by fear, Matilda replied. But they shall find me unbroken. Still, she looked toward him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. Without you, Edward, I would have drunk their poison, and all England might be lost. Edward inclined his head, a warrior's salute. Then let them know, Empress, that steel and will stand united. Let them bring shadows and flame. We will answer with light and blood. And for the first time, a faint smile touched Matilda's lips. Not soft, nor gentle, but fierce, the smile of one who knows she does not stand alone. Chapter 4: The Prophecy of Stone and Flame. The fires of Winchester smoldered for 3 days. Smoke clung to the crooked streets, and the bells of the cathedral tolled without ceasing, summoning mourners to bury the dead. Soldiers shoveled ash from doorways. Women wept over the charred remains of homes. Children clutched at fathers who would never return. The victory was real, yet hollow, like a chalice of gold filled only with dust. Empress Matilda walked among her people with no crown upon her brow, only a plain cloak of gray. She knelt with widows, carried water to the weary, and laid her own hand upon the dead. Wherever she passed, voices hushed, and eyes lifted to her with something stronger than loyalty, reverence. Edward watched her from the shadow of the cathedral steps. The firelight caught his face, painting him in crimson and gold, and his eyes burned with a storm he could not still. He had fought in 100 wars, but this was no ordinary struggle. The enemies they faced were not men who sought land or coin, but sorcery old as stone and patient as death. And he, the Black Prince, torn from centuries beyond, had been thrust into its center. On the 4th night, as frost glazed the city's ruins, a stranger came. He appeared at the north gate, barefoot, his cloak stitched from rags and bones, his hair white as ash. The guards lowered their spears, demanding his name, but he only lifted a hand blackened with soot. I am the voice of stone, he croaked, and flame walks in my shadow. Take me to the Lady of Winchester. Word sped through the city like wildfire. By the time the hermit was brought into the cathedral hall, nobles and knights had gathered, whispering uneasily. Matilda sat upon a rough chair, her mantle scorched from battle, Edward at her right hand, Robert of Gloucester at her left. The hermit bowed low, his bones creaking. Empress of England, he rasped, the earth itself has spoken in your hour of trial. Beneath Stockbridge, when the beast fell, the stones whispered. In the siege, when flame rained upon Winchester, the fire too gave tongue. I am their vessel, unworthy though I be. Some scoffed. Geoffrey's allies, though their lord was dead, their doubts lingered. A mad beggar, one knight muttered, shall England take counsel from dust? But Matilda raised her hand. Let him speak, for dust is all that remains when kings and crowns alike are gone. The hermit's eyes gleamed. He stretched his arms wide and spoke in a voice that seemed not wholly his own, but deeper, older. Greater than, lo, the shadow crown shall rise, born of betrayal, fed by flame. It shall fall only to the twice born, crowned by neither king nor pope, but by the fire that devours and the stone that endures. Blood shall drown the Thames, and from ruin shall England awaken. Silence followed, heavy as lead. Edward felt the words strike him like blows. Twice born, he, who had died centuries ahead, only to walk once more among the living. And crowned not by pope nor king? What fate was this, thrust upon him? Robert crossed himself. Some knights muttered prayers, others glanced at Edward with unease, whispering behind gauntleted hands. Matilda rose slowly. Her eyes, grey and unyielding, swept the hall. Prophecy is no master of mine. Yet if fate speaks, I will listen. Let England's crown not be bought by shadow. Let stone and flame be our witness. The following dawn, Robert of Gloucester led Edward down into the crypts beneath Winchester Cathedral. The air grew colder with each step, torches sputtering as if reluctant to burn. At last they reached a sealed door of ancient oak, its hinges bound with rusted iron, its face carved with symbols long forgotten. This place was barred before my grandfather's day, Robert murmured. But when Winchester burned, I dreamed of this door, as if it called to me. Together they forced it open, wood splintering, dust billowing like a sigh from the tomb of ages. Within lay a chamber hewn from solid stone. At its heart stood an altar of black basalt, upon which rested a crown unlike any Edward had ever beheld. It was wrought of stone and metal fused, jagged as mountain peaks, yet gleaming with veins of fire that pulsed faintly as if alive. The air around it shimmered with heat, though frost rimmed the floor. Robert whispered, "The crown of stone and flame. Forged, they say, in Arthur's day, when druids bound fire to earth. It was said no man could wear it and live, unless chosen." Edward approached. The crown seemed to draw his very breath, its faint glow reflecting in his eyes. He reached out, hand trembling. The moment his fingers brushed its edge, fire roared to life. Vision swallowed him. He saw rivers of blood choking the Thames, castles burning one by one. He saw the crown of shadows, black and cruel, resting upon a figure cloaked in midnight. A figure whose face was hidden, yet whose laughter shook the heavens. He saw himself standing alone upon a field of corpses, his sword shattered, his banner torn, and in the distance, Matilda kneeling in chains of flame. With a cry, he tore his hand away. The vision broke. He staggered, gasping, his palm scorched though he had not lifted the crown. Robert seized his arm. "Edward, what did you see?" Edward's face was pale, his voice hoarse. "The end. Unless..." He glanced back at the crown, its fire dimmed once more, waiting. "Unless I am the one it seeks." That evening, word of the prophecy spread through the court like wildfire. Some hailed Edward as England's savior. Others whispered that he was no man at all, but a wraith conjured by sorcery. A few cried openly that the Empress must cast him aside, lest she lose her crown to a prince not of her time. In council, the debate raged. One baron shouted, "This black prince is an omen of ruin." Another, "He is twice born," the prophecies answer. Matilda listened in silence, her hands folded, her gaze never wavering from Edward. At last, she rose. "Lords of England," she said, her voice steady as steel, "in the hour of Winchester's siege, when shadows poured through our gates, who stood at the fore? Was it Geoffrey, whose treachery opened the way? Was it you, who cower now behind words? No, it was Edward, whose sword did not falter, whose arm saved this city." She turned to Edward, meeting his dark eyes with her own. "If fate has marked him twice born, then so be it. If flame and stone choose him, then so do I. He stands not apart from England, but with it. With me." The hall fell silent. The matter was decided. That night, beneath the cold stars, Edward stood upon the battlements, staring northward. The wind bit deep, yet he scarcely felt it. His hand still throbbed from the crown's fire, as though a brand had been pressed into his very soul. Matilda joined him, her mantle clasped tight against the chill. For a time, neither spoke. At last she said, "You fear the crown." He nodded. "I saw ruin. I saw you chained. I saw myself broken." Her voice was low but firm. "Visions are warnings, not sentences. Stone endures. Flame devours. Yet both can build as well as destroy. Perhaps the crown shows not what must be, but what may be." Edward turned, meeting her gaze. For the first time, he saw not only an empress but a woman who bore the world's weight and did not bow. "You trust me," he said softly. "I must," she replied. Then, more quietly, "And I do." The words bound them more tightly than oaths or crowns. Days later, scouts brought grim tidings. The armies of the Crown of Shadows had marched north. Oxford, seat of scholars and stone, was their next prize. Already villages burned in their wake. Matilda summoned her captains. Winchester endures, but if Oxford falls, the heart of England falters. We march at dawn. And so, banners were raised anew, swords sharpened, prayers whispered. The battered but unbroken host of the Empress would march once more, guided by steel, by faith, and by the strange destiny of a prince born twice. Beneath Winchester's crypts, the crown of stone and flame pulsed faintly, as though listening. As though waiting. Chapter 5: The Gathering Storm. The bells of Winchester tolled farewell as dawn broke upon the battered city. Their iron voices rang hollow across the frost, echoing off half-burned walls and broken towers. Yet still, the host gathered, knights tightening straps of mail, archers testing bowstrings, common soldiers murmuring prayers into the cold. At their head rode Empress Matilda, cloaked in scarlet and steel, her face stern but alight with purpose. At her right hand was Edward, the Black Prince, his black armor burnished with the glow of early sunlight, his banner, sable, bearing the 3 ostrich feathers of his house, unfurled in the wind. To the people who watched them ride out, they seemed not merely leaders, but symbols of defiance, of destiny. Behind them, Robert of Gloucester barked commands, marshalling the line into a column that stretched for miles, cavalry first, then infantry, wagons of supplies, and finally the levies drawn from towns and villages who had survived Winchester's fire. The road to Oxford awaited. Omens on the road. At first the march was steady, though weariness gnawed at every man. The land between Winchester and Oxford should have been peaceful, rolling hills dotted with sheep, farmsteads wreathed in chimney smoke, chapels whose bells welcomed travelers. Yet the further north they rode, the more the land seemed abandoned. Villages lay silent, doors swinging open in the wind. Fields were blackened not by winter frost but by something fouler, as if fire had run through the soil itself. Wells reeked of sulfur, and once, at twilight, the army passed a river whose waters shimmered black as pitch, reflecting no star. Whispers ran through the ranks. Men made the sign of the cross. Others muttered charms against the old gods. On the third night, as the army camped near a ruined chapel, Edward walked the perimeter. His thoughts were troubled, his hand still aching from the searing touch of the crown of stone and flame. The prophecy gnawed at him. Twice born, crowned by neither pope nor king. It was then that he heard singing. A woman's voice, low and haunting, rising from the trees beyond the campfires. Not in Latin, nor in French, but in a tongue older than either. Edward followed the sound. The Druidess. In a clearing stood a woman cloaked in green, her hair the color of autumn leaves, her eyes pale as mist. She held no torch, yet the air seemed to glow faintly around her. At her feet were stones set in a circle, carved with spirals worn by time. "You should not have followed, twice born," she said, her voice as calm as the wind through pines. Edward's hand moved instinctively to his sword, though he did not draw it. "You know me. I know what you are." She stepped closer, and he saw lines of age on her face, yet also something timeless, as though she had watched centuries pass. "The crown has marked you. The crown has marked you. Stone and flame stir within your blood. But beware, Prince, every crown demands a price. The shadow crown feeds on betrayal. The crown of stone and flame feeds on sacrifice." Edward frowned. "Sacrifice?" The Druidess nodded. "It grants power, yes. To raise cities from ruin, to burn armies to ash. But it is not wielded by will alone. The one who wears it must give what they hold most dear. A life, a bond, perhaps even love." Her eyes fixed on him, and he felt as though she pierced the very marrow of his soul. "Would you bear such a cost, to save this land?" Edward's throat tightened. In his visions, he had seen Matilda in chains, fire devouring her. Would the crown demand her? He clenched his fists. "If England is to stand, I will pay what I must." The Druidess only sighed, as though hearing that answer many times before. She turned, vanishing into the mist. "Then beware the Shadow King, Edward. He has already paid his price. And what he has given was England itself." When Edward returned to camp, he told no one of the encounter. But her words burned in his heart like embers that would not cool. The Siege of Oxford. By the 7th day, spires rose against the horizon. Oxford, city of scholars, its stone towers lifting proudly from the plain. But smoke stained the sky above, and when the army crested the final ridge, their hearts sank. Oxford was besieged. Encircling the city were countless tents of black and crimson, their banners marked with a sigil none wished to see, a crown of thorns, shadow upon shadow. Siege engines loomed like skeletal beasts, and at their heart a great pyre burned, casting the plain in a sickly glow. Edward felt the blood freeze in his veins. The druidess had spoken true. Upon the pyre's flame, a figure stood, cloaked in darkness, crowned with iron that seemed to bleed shadows. He raised one hand. Though distance lay between them, Edward felt the weight of that gaze fall upon him like a hammer. The Shadow King. Matilda's voice rang out beside him, hard as steel. Oxford still holds. Look, the scholars have raised wards. Indeed, from the city's walls shimmered a faint dome of light, a shield of pure sorcery. Lightning crackled when the enemy's catapults hurled stones against it, and each time the wards held, cheers faintly echoed from within the city. But the Shadow King's army was vast, and wards could be broken. Robert of Gloucester leaned forward grimly. If Oxford falls, London itself may follow. We must break this siege. Edward's eyes fixed upon the dark crown gleaming on their enemy's brow. Then we strike at the heart. Battle in the shadows. That night, under cover of darkness, Edward led a vanguard of knights through the marshes east of Oxford, hoping to strike the siege engines before dawn. The moon was veiled, the air thick with smoke, and shadows seemed to writhe unnaturally around them. They crept close, too close, before the trap was sprung. From the darkness poured not soldiers but creatures, men twisted by sorcery, their eyes glowing red, their flesh blackened and cracked as though burned from within. They howled and fell upon the knights with unnatural fury. Steel clashed, screams tore the night. Edward's sword flashed, felling monster after monster, but still they came, endless. His men faltered, some breaking ranks. And then, the Shadow King appeared. He strode across the battlefield as if the earth itself bent to him, the crown of shadows blazing with a light darker than night. His voice carried, though he did not shout. Twice born, you do not belong to this age. Yield, and I will grant you the mercy of returning to your grave. Edward raised his sword, though his arm trembled under that gaze. If I am twice born, then I was born for this. I will not yield. The Shadow King lifted a hand. Darkness surged like a wave, swallowing fire, drowning steel. Edward braced for the end. But across the field, a horn sounded. Matilda's banner rose in the night, scarlet against shadow. She had marched with the main host, striking sooner than planned, unwilling to let Edward face death alone. The two armies clashed, light against dark, faith against sorcery. Oxford's wards flared brighter, as if lending their strength to the Empress's cause. For the first time, the Shadow King faltered, but even as he withdrew into the night, his laughter lingered, cold and cruel. This is but the beginning. The Empress's host stood bloodied but unbroken, the siege engines shattered, Oxford saved, for now. Yet Edward knew the truth. This battle had been but a test, a measure of his strength. The true war had only just begun, and in the crypts of Winchester, the crown of stone and flames still waited. Chapter 6: The Price of Crowns. The bells of Oxford rang victory, though their peals were thin and strained, more relief than triumph. Smoke from broken siege engines still hung above the plain, and the stench of blood mingled with incense burned by priests to cleanse the fields of foul sorcery. Yet within the city walls, banners flew anew, and people dared to breathe freely. Edward, his armor scarred and blackened, entered the gates alongside Empress Matilda. Their arrival was met with cheers, though among the nobles those cheers were quieter, eyes narrowed with doubt. Some whispered that Oxford had been saved only by sorcery, that the twice-born prince drew shadows to himself like a lodestone. Matilda ignored the whispers. Her voice carried across the city square as she raised her sword. Oxford holds, England holds, and while one stone of her walls yet stands, I will not bow to shadow or usurper. The people roared, faith renewed. Yet Edward, watching from her side, felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. The Shadow King's laughter still echoed in his mind. The manuscripts of Magdalen Hall. That night, the Empress held council in Magdalen Hall, the oldest of Oxford's colleges. Its vaulted chamber smelled of ink and dust, its walls lined with tomes that had survived 100 years. Here, among scholars and lords alike, they sought understanding. An aged master of the college, Brother Anselm, laid a bundle of manuscripts upon the table. His hands trembled, not from age alone. These were sealed in our vaults centuries ago, forbidden even to scholars. Yet the wards upon Oxford drew strength from them. They speak of the crowns. Edward leaned forward, unease prickling his skin. Anselm opened one parchment. Its ink was faded but legible, the script curling in Latin mixed with runes older still. Greater than in the elder days, when Albion was young, there were forged 3 crowns by hands both mortal and divine. One of shadow, wrought of betrayal. One of stone and flame, forged from sacrifice. One of light, whose making was lost. Another scroll bore an illumination. A figure crowned with fire, standing upon a field of ash where armies lay in ruin. This, Anselm whispered, is the first bearer of the crown of stone and flame. His name is lost, but the chronicles call him the Fire Lord. He ended wars in a single season, yet when his reign ended, not even his bones remained. Only ash. The hall fell silent, the fire crackled as though in mockery. Edward felt the ache in his hand burn again. He remembered the druidess's words. Sacrifice. The crown demands it. Whispers of betrayal. As days passed, Oxford became a haven for Matilda's cause. Nobles arrived to pledge fealty, bringing men at arms and coin. Yet not all tongues were loyal. In hidden alcoves, Edward overheard mutterings. The Empress is reckless, dragging us against foes of sorcery. The twice-born? He is a spectre, not a man. Better parley with the Shadow King than follow ghosts. One night, Edward confronted Robert of Gloucester. They do not trust us. Already they weigh whether to desert. Robert sighed, heavy with care. It is the way of lords. They bend where the wind blows. But you, Edward, you frighten them. They saw you stand against the Shadow King and live. They wonder if you are man or omen. Edward turned away, anger rising. Then let them fear, so long as they do not betray. Yet even as he spoke, he feared betrayal was already at hand. The Council of Lords. A fortnight after Oxford's relief, Matilda convened a great council. The chamber brimmed with lords, knights, and bishops, their banners crowding the rafters. On the long table lay maps of England. London still held by Stephen's men, but whispers said the Shadow King himself walked the White Tower. Matilda's voice was firm. We must march on London. Strike before the Shadow King tightens his grip. At once voices clashed. To march is folly, cried Earl Ferrers. Our men are weary, our coffers thin. Better to hold Oxford and wait. Wait, thundered Robert. Each day we wait, the Shadow King strengthens. Do you think Stephen's barons will rally to us if we cower? Edward's gaze swept the room. He saw divided faces, some eager for war, others pale with fear. And amid them, one man who said nothing, Lord Mowbray, his eyes watchful, his hand upon the pommel of his dagger. Then came the moment. As Matilda leaned over the map, a blade flashed. Assassination in the hall. Lord Mowbray lunged, dagger aimed at the Empress's heart. Chaos erupted. Nobles shouted, chairs overturned. Edward moved without thought, intercepting the strike. The blade sank into his shoulder, blood soaking his mail, but Matilda was untouched. Edward's sword flashed. Mowbray fell, throat cut, his blood mingling with Edward's upon the stones. The chamber roared in panic. Treachery! The Shadow King's hand is here. Matilda's voice rose above them, iron and fire. See what becomes of traitors. Let none doubt. The Shadow King has spies among us. But while I live, his shadows will not claim England. Yet as Edward staggered, wounded, he felt a whisper in his mind. You bleed for her. You would die for her. But if you wore me, you would never need bleed again. The crown of stone and flame called to him, its voice like fire in his veins. He saw visions, himself upon a throne of fire, Matilda at his side, the Shadow King consumed to ash. Yet each vision ended the same. Her face burned away, her voice silenced. Edward clenched his fists, sweat chilling his brow. He could not tell if he had stood silent for a moment or an hour. The crown's demand. That night, alone in his chamber, Edward dreamed. He walked a plain of blackened earth, beneath a sky of flame. Upon a dais of stone rested the crown of stone and flame, glowing as if molten. You seek victory, it whispered, though no lips moved. You seek to end shadow. I can grant it, but every fire feeds on something. What will you burn, twice born? Before him appeared Matilda, chained, her eyes filled with defiance. Then Robert, bleeding, reaching for him. Then nameless soldiers, peasants, children, all fading into smoke. Choose, the crown said. Give me what you love most, and I will give you a kingdom. Refuse, and all shall be ashes anyway. Edward awoke gasping, his sheets scorched as if touched by flame. Oxford still held. The lords still debated. The Shadow King still gathered strength. But Edward knew the truth. The time was coming when he must choose, between crown and love, between sacrifice and ruin. And whatever choice he made, England itself would burn. Chapter 7: The Betrayal of the Thames. The march from Oxford was a grim procession. Though victory had been theirs, the army knew it was a brittle, fleeting thing. The roads southward were choked with mud, for autumn rains had swollen every stream, and the countryside lay hushed beneath clouds that seemed to press low upon the earth. Fields stood untended, cottages abandoned, livestock gone feral in hedgerows. It was as though England herself held her breath. Empress Matilda rode at the head of the column, steel glinting in the weak sun, her gaze fixed ahead as though by force of will alone she could drag her people to safety. At her side rode Edward, his mail polished but blood still staining his cloak, the wound from Mowbray's dagger yet unhealed. Behind them came Robert of Gloucester, and then the long line of lords, knights, banners, and weary men at arms. Some sang to keep their spirits, but most marched in silence, casting wary looks at the shadows beneath the trees. The crown's fire. On the third night, Edward dreamt again of fire. He stood upon the Tower of London, the city burning beneath him. In his hand he held the crown of stone and flame, its weight unbearable, its heat like molten iron. Upon the battlements knelt Matilda, her hair aflame, her eyes accusing. Why? She whispered, and the crown answered for him, because victory has a price. Edward woke with a cry, sweat pouring, the sheets smoldering where his hand had clenched. He pressed his palms to the cold floor stones, whispering prayers he no longer believed. Yet the whisper returned, soft as a lover's breath. You cannot save them without me. He did not sleep again that night. Oaths at Reading. They halted at Reading, where the Thames curved wide and slow, a natural place for ford or ferry. The lords gathered in council once more within the monastery's ruined cloister. Rain pattered on the broken stones, and their voices rose in discord. We should not push on, declared Earl Ferrers, his face pale beneath his helm. London is a trap. Better we hold Reading, gather strength, and wait. Robert's voice cut sharp. Wait? Always you speak of waiting. Each day we wait. Stephen's men swell the Shadow King's host. London must be taken, or the realm is lost. Others murmured, some in agreement, others uneasy. Edward watched their faces, weighing loyalties. He saw fear in Ferrers's eyes, not the fear of battle, but the fear of decision. It was a man's look when he had already chosen his side. Matilda slammed her fist upon the table. I will not linger in monasteries while shadows rule my throne. London is our aim. To London we march. Reluctantly, the lords agreed. Yet Edward caught Furs slipping away that night, whispering to his retainers in the dark. The river crossing. At dawn they reached the ford, the river swollen and swift. Men waded into the water, their armor gleaming as they urged horses and wagons across. Then the mist rose. It came not as natural fog, but as a wall of gray that boiled from the far bank, swallowing trees, fields, and sky. Trumpets sounded in alarm. From the mist rode figures, knights armored in blackened steel, their eyes burning coals, their banners torn shadows. Horses snorted steam though their flanks were bone. They came silent, yet the ground shook with their charge. "The shadow host!" cried a voice. Panic spread like fire. Edward drew his blade, heart pounding. The crown's voice leapt in his mind. "Wear me, and they cannot touch you. Refuse, and all will perish." He shook it off and rode forward, rallying men to him. Hold the line. Shields." The river ran red. The ambush. Spears shattered against the spectral knights. Arrows passed through them as though through mist. Only steel wielded with desperate faith seemed to wound them, and even then, wounds smoked and closed. Edward fought at the ford, his blade glowing faint with heat as though answering the crown's call. He struck down one rider, then another, but for each that fell, two more emerged. Around him men screamed, dragged into the river by shadowed hands. Matilda held the banner high, rallying her guard. Robert hacked through the mist with grim defiance, but the tide turned against them. Then came the horn. From the far bank, real men at arms surged forth, Stephen's loyalists, their armor bearing Furs' device. Betrayal was plain. While the shadow knights sowed terror, mortal swords struck the killing blow. "Furs!" Matilda spat, her face white with fury. "Traitor!" Edward saw him across the ford, safe behind ranks of men, watching with cold detachment. The breaking of the host. The Empress's vanguard shattered. Men drowned in the river, wagons overturned, horses bolted. The banners of Oxford fell one by one. "Retreat!" Robert bellowed, his voice raw. "Back to the woods!" Matilda resisted, her sword dripping black blood, but Edward seized her reins. "We cannot win here. Live to fight again." She looked at him, rage and despair burning in her eyes, but at last she yielded. Together they cut a path through the chaos, the Empress's banner torn and bloodied. Behind them, the army broke. What had been 10,000 strong was scattered to the winds, the Thames carrying away the dead. The crown's whisper. That night, in the safety of a marshland hollow, survivors gathered, their numbers pitiful. The Empress sat in silence, her face shadowed, Robert nursing wounds at her side. Edward walked apart, the screams of drowning men still in his ears. He felt the weight of the unseen crown pressing upon his brow. "You could have saved them," it whispered. "You could have burned the shadow away. One choice, and they would live." His hands shook. He pressed them to his temples. But the whisper only grew louder. "Next time, do not refuse me." Thus ended the ford at the Thames, not with triumph, but with ruin. The Empress's cause was broken, her army scattered, and upon the winds that swept the river valley, the laughter of the Shadow King carried far. Edward knew then, the next battle would not be won with swords alone. Chapter 8 Ashes of Exile. The flight into the fens. The marshlands swallowed them. By moonlight, Matilda, Edward, Robert, and the remnants of their guard stumbled through reed and bog, mud sucking at their boots, mist curling like ghosts. The roar of the Thames was far behind, yet its memory clung to them. Every cry of a night bird seemed like the scream of drowning men, every ripple in the water like the stir of spectral hooves. "Fewer than 500 remain," Robert said grimly, limping, his leg wrapped with bloodied cloth. "Out of 10,000. Matilda did not answer. Her eyes were hard as flint, her jaw clenched, her banner gone, her crown left in the river mud. Yet the fire in her spirit did not dim. Edward walked beside her in silence. He had not spoken since the ford. The whispers haunted him. The voice of the crown of stone and flame, accusing, promising, seducing. He feared to open his mouth, lest its words pour forth instead of his own. For 3 days they wandered, evading Stephen's patrols, surviving on roots and what fish Robert's men could spear. At last they came upon a village hidden deep in the fens, reed huts, peat fires, simple folk who still whispered prayers to the old gods. Here the fugitives found shelter. The people of the fen. The villagers knelt before Matilda, not because of her crown but because of her endurance. "We know you," their elder croaked. "The lady who defies the shadow." They gave her bread, fish, and dry cloaks, though they had little to spare. Children stared wide-eyed at Edward, for in him they saw both hope and fear. His presence made the very air shimmer faintly with heat. One night, the elder woman came to Edward. She carried a bowl of fireweed and ash, and traced a circle around him. "The flame follows you," she said. "Not flame of hearth or torch, but the world fire, the fire that consumes kings." Edward shuddered. "Then how'd I quench it?" She shook her head. "You do not. You either master it, or it masters you. The letters from London. A messenger crept through the marshes. A scholar from Oxford, robes torn, scrolls bound in oilskin. He brought tidings of London. The city had bent the knee to Stephen, but not to him alone. They whispered now of a shadow king, enthroned in Westminster, whose face none dared look upon. He wore a crown of night, a crown that bled darkness across the land. The guilds murmur of famine, the scholar told them. The river grows black, the sun dimmed at noon. He has made pacts with things not of this world, and still, his power grows. Matilda slammed her fist into the table. "Then we march again, with what we have, with who we have. I will not let him sit in my city." Robert groaned. "With 500? It is madness." But Edward's eyes narrowed. He alone had heard the Shadow King's laughter on the wind, a sound too human to be mere sorcery. "We must know what he is. If London rots, England follows. We cannot hide forever. The Shadow's messenger." That night, a fog thicker than any before rolled into the fen. The villagers barred their huts, whispering charms. Edward walked the marsh paths restless, unable to sleep. From the fog a figure emerged, tall, hooded, cloaked in black feathers that glistened like oil. Its face was shadow, its voice many voices. "You are wasted here, Prince," it said. "Your army broken, your empress ruined. But you are chosen. You feel it, burning, hungering." Edward drew his sword, though his hand shook. "Speak plainly, shade." The hood tilted. "The crown of stone and flame is yours. Take it, and you may rival even my master. Refuse, and you will be nothing more than ash on the wind." Edward's teeth clenched. "Tell me, who is your master?" The voice chuckled, echoing like iron on stone. "You will know him soon. He knows you already." Then the fog swallowed it whole. The choice of the Empress. At dawn Edward told Matilda what he had seen. She studied him long, eyes piercing as a hawk's. "Do you believe him?" she asked. "I believe. The Shadow King wants me," Edward admitted. "Not slain, but turned. He believes I am a weapon yet to be claimed." Matilda laid a hand on his shoulder. "Then we must keep you ours. For if he wins you, Edward, he wins all." Her words should have comforted him. Instead, Edward felt the weight of both crowns pressing upon him, hers of legitimacy, his of fire and ruin. And he wondered, deep in his soul, whether either could be born without breaking. The oath in the marshes. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Matilda called her lords, what few remained, to kneel in the reeds. By torchlight, their faces haggard, they swore anew their fealty. Not to victory, not to glory, but to defiance. "Though England crumble, though shadows drown the sun," Matilda said, her voice steady, "still we will not yield." Edward knelt with them, though the crown's whisper coiled in his skull. "Yield to me, and you will not need their oaths. You will rule by fire alone. He forced the thought aside, raising his sword to the stars. Then let the Shadow King hear it. We are not broken. We are not done. The reeds bent in a wind that came from nowhere. Somewhere far off, across the darkened realm, the Shadow King surely smiled. Chapter 9 The Shadow Throne. The road to London. The march from the fens was quiet, too quiet. No birds sang, no farmers tilled. Villages stood empty, doors swinging, meals left rotting on tables. At night, Edward felt the dreams worsen. Always the same. A throne of stone and flame, a black crown of shadow, and a figure seated upon it, faceless, waiting. Matilda led at the front, her banner newly sewn by the fen women, ragged yet defiant. Behind her trudged the remnant host, battered knights, barefoot peasants, and even the druids who had sworn their aid. They were no great army, but they were flame in the dark. The blighted city. At last they saw London, or what was left of it. The towers of Westminster rose like broken teeth against the sky. The Thames flowed black, reeking of rot, sluggish as if thick with blood. The air itself dimmed. The sun's rays seemed to halt at the city's walls. The gates yawned open, unguarded. A trap, Robert muttered, sword drawn. Of course, Matilda answered, grim as iron. But one we must walk into. They entered. The streets were empty. No children, no merchants, no priests. Only the echo of footsteps and the whisper of unseen wings. Then they saw them. Shadows walking as men. Tall, thin, cloaked in night, with eyes like cinders. They did not strike, only followed, herding the company deeper. The throne of Westminster. At last they reached Westminster Hall. The great doors groaned open of their own accord. Within, the air reeked of incense and ash. Tapestries hung shredded. Torches burned with black flame. And there, upon the high seat, sat the Shadow King. He wore a crown not wrought of gold but of midnight, jagged as shattered glass. His face was veiled in shifting shadow, yet hints of flesh showed. A man's jawline, a soldier's hands, eyes that burned like coals. He rose as they entered. The hall shuddered. Empress, he said, voice echoing like 10 voices at once. Prince, at last. The revelation. Matilda lifted her chin. Who are you, usurper? What devil speaks through your lips? The king laughed, deep and cold. Shadows rippled from his form, filling the hall. Then he spoke a name. His own. Edward staggered as the truth struck. This was no stranger, no demon. The Shadow King was Henry, Matilda's cousin, her rival claimant. Raised from death, bound in sorcery, crowned in darkness. Henry smiled through the veil of shadow. Did you think I would fall so easily? The people cried out for a king, and I answered. Death could not stop me. Why should you? Matilda's breath caught. You are no king. You are carrion clothed in sorcery. Henry spread his arms. Call me what you will. But they follow me. The lords, the guilds, the church. Even the dead bend the knee. His eyes burned into Edward. And so will you. The temptation. The hall fell silent. Shadows circled Edward like vultures. Henry's voice softened. Nephew of kings, heir of fire, I know what burns in you. The world fire calls you, as it called me. But you are stronger than I ever was. Take your place beside me. 2 crowns, 2 thrones, stone and flame, night and fire. Edward trembled. The crown of stone and flame pulsed in his dreams, answering Henry's words. He could see it. Himself seated beside this dark king, fire and shadow ruling England unchallenged. Matilda stepped forward, eyes blazing. Edward, look at me. You are not his creature. You are England's hope. Do not yield. The shadows hissed. Henry's grin widened. Choose, boy, your empress, or your destiny. The clash of wills. Edward cried out, clutching his head. Fire seared his veins. Voices roared in his skull. The crown's whisper mingled with Henry's call. Then Edward raised his sword. Enough. His voice rang like iron. You speak of destiny, Henry. But I will forge my own. He struck. Light exploded. The shadows recoiled. Henry staggered, snarling, his veil tearing to reveal half a human face, twisted with fury. Then you are my enemy, Henry spat. And I will unmake you. Dash dash dash. Flight from Westminster. The hall collapsed in chaos. Shadows poured from every wall, talons reaching, blades flashing. Edward fought like flame itself, every stroke driving back the dark. Matilda called the retreat, dragging Robert as the roof trembled. They burst from Westminster into the blackened streets. Behind them, Henry's laughter followed, rolling like thunder. Run, little flames, he roared. You cannot hide from night. When next we meet, you will kneel. The doors slammed shut, and London's bells tolled, not with metal but with screams.